Hope everybody's doing wonderful this Thursday evening. We're back in the saddle as always. And how many new things can we come up with every single day that we go live that we are going to have to talk about, Jen?
I don't even know what we're talking about today because, to be quite honest with you, I haven't been following the news today and I've been happy.
Well, I guess that's a good
So,
thing.
if there's anything new, you guys let me know. I really haven't been following today. I had a nice day of no news.
Well, Rick Snyder has officially been charged
Oh, with a misdemeanor.
with willful duty to act as
That's, I wasn't even thinking
I
about
was
that.
hoping we could have gotten our good friend Jordan Cheriton to slip on for a few minutes to talk about it, but as you can imagine, he's tied up with God knows how many different people today.
So, if people don't know what we're talking about, ex Governor Snyder of Michigan, who is responsible for poisoning, like, I want to say like 100,000 people, um, and was supposedly going to be getting a little bit of his comeuppance in the legal system, he apparently was just charged with two misdemeanors. And apparently, ooh, they could result in $1,000 fine.
Possibly a year in prison.
He is responsible for knowingly. See, I don't think people understand that. He knew that this was going to happen and he did it anyway. See, I don't find that negligent. I find that willful. I don't find that like, and then even after when they found out that there was an issue and they said they fixed it and lied about fixing it. See, this is where we're into, this is not negligence. This is now nefarious. So I don't understand how any of that can fall within a misdemeanor.
No, you're right, and of course, it is part of our news and amuse topic. You know, it, right now, it is something that we're going to get further into, but it's a monumental issue that isn't being talked about by the corporate media because they all protect each other.
That chair was moved over from when I was on
Oh,
alone yesterday on my phone call. So you got moved over and I'm like, why am I'm like here.
I'm not trying to dominate the
I'm
space.
I'm just gonna be over here off screen.
Could you?
Can you, but you really do need to move over. The chair, what, all right.
And now you're dominating the center
No, I
station.
want to get it so that the wheels aren't hitting. Okay. All right.
We have to let Jen be comfortable. That's Jen's.
Oh yeah, this
comfort is
coming
more
from
important.
somebody who has a cushion that he walks around with, like
Hit
Linus,
the like button, everybody. If you're on YouTube,
like Linus in a blanket.
make sure that you subscribe. If you're first time on YouTube, very important. Make sure to like,
Okay,
comment, and share.
let's look at this for a second because you're going to probably have to answer this because
Oh, I don't know where to begin with the
yeah,
Secretary of Labor.
yeah,
It's not
Bernie Sanders.
But maybe that's a good thing. I would much rather have Bernie as the chair
Well,
of the budget committee.
that,
of
you know
course.
what, and that was always my thought about the idea of Bernie being in the cabinet. That was never, I never liked that idea because of that. You know, we cannot forfeit the only real progressive in the Senate. Like, we cannot do that. That would be a bad thing.
No, there's no question that Bernie's position, where he's going to be right now, is the best possible position he could be in, being the chair of the budget committee in the Senate.
I'm not familiar enough with them. And to be honest with you, really, once I realized that we were getting no tangibles with this incoming administration, I really have somewhat checked out of a lot of the cabinet picks. I will go in with the presumption that they're corporatists and neoliberals. And if I'm shown wrong, like in the particular case of Deb Haaland, there, then that wouldn't be the case. Like, there are a couple of people that are being thrown in there that are not going to be that, but for the most part, I would say that I will not be satisfied with who he's going to pick in his cabinet because I'm not satisfied with him. So it's, yeah. But I don't know either of these people in particular, but I would venture to say that whichever one would be better for actual labor and rank and file would be the person that I would prefer.
Yeah,
So,
and of course, when it comes to decisions that are going to be made right now, a lot of things could be in limbo because apparently Mitch McConnell may have an ace up his sleeve in terms of actually doing some kind of an impeachment trial in the Senate. He has the ability to delay this. He says he's not bringing the Senate back, I think, for a week. And so by doing that, this is the type of trial that could go 60 days, maybe more. And that would conflict with Biden's first 100 days in office, which would delay getting anything done. So, how badly do the Democrats want to try to impeach Trump after he's out of office, if that even means anything at this point? Because that seems to be what they're doing. I mean, without question, this is going to be a complete and utter shit show. I think that's the nicest way to put it. And it's not going to get anything done. What is it going to accomplish? I know that the onus is to get it done, if for no other reason, because they don't want the lingering prospect of Trump running again in 2024 to be there. They want to try to make sure that that is put to rest. But that's something that I think really needs to be talked about. What in essence is going to happen here if we're going to deal with this lingering issue of Trump being impeached, not being impeached, but then also, you got a lot of major things that Biden is going to need to do once he's officially president.
Why is Bernie on this? I'm curious.
Because Bernie is he's officially now the Senate chair of the Senate.
Okay, so why I needed to be better prepared for this.
Okay, well, the
right.
emails were there this afternoon. So
no, that's not what I meant. I meant that you just started talking about it without saying, we're going into a particular segment.
Well, no, I mean, obviously we were kind of like hodgepodging a bunch of stuff.
That's what I'm saying. I don't understand. Here we go. All right, but so we are lucky tonight because at first I want to say that we were supposed to have on tonight friend Steve Grumbine, who was somebody that has been very active in the progressive movement and is a very big advocate for modern monetary theory. And he was supposed to be our guest tonight, but Steve has COVID and he is in the hospital. The latest report. Yeah, we send him our best. And the latest report I saw from him was he was doing okay. Like he's starting to sort of feel like he's maybe rounding the corner. So that's good. But we will have him on again at some point. So we are very lucky that we were able to get another modern monetary theory expert. It's not like there are so many of those people just sort of hanging around. So do you want to do news and amuse?
I will in a second. We do already have a couple of questions here.
Okay.
Kimberly Young has already asked. So now that he's been impeached twice, I keep him from running any political offices.
No,
that is not.
They have to convict him in the Senate.
Yes.
So what this is going to come down to really is whether or not Mitch McConnell wants to really get rid of Trump. Is Mitch McConnell ready to throw Trump under the bus? I would have said no, really forever, until now the corporate donors are jumping ship. So the fact that the corporate donors are jumping ship, that is definitely going to make McConnell think twice about standing behind Trump. And so really, if he brings that to the Senate and they put that through and they can get a conviction on the impeachment, then that will bar him from being able to run again.
Yeah.
But then there's this other thing, this really cool clause in the 14th Amendment, apparently, that could really just nail this whole thing shut. So, you know what? I'm going to pull it up. So anyway,
Jen always has her pocket.
I always have my Constitution.
So
always,
very important.
It's very important. But yeah, apparently there is something in the. I have to see what it is that they're talking about. Anyway.
I understand that they want to get rid of Trump, but the truth is, I would much rather get rid of the current structure of the GOP. I think that's much more important. And of course, a former congressperson that you've had the pleasure of communicating with briefly, and hopefully we get him on the show at some point, Justin Amash.
Yeah.
I mean, he put out a massively popular tweet today, basically telling people to come join the Libertarian Party. Why are you staying in the GOP? It's, it's a completely corporate captured party. And, the Libertarian Party, while conservative, is supposed to be principled in what they believe in, whether you agree with them or not.
Who's principled?
The Libertarian Party. They're trying to.
I don't know that. And to be at this point, I don't find any parties to be worthy of anything. Now, libertarian people. Sure. I mean, but I don't find any of these parties to have any amount of integrity. They're just businesses.
That's the same. It's the same argument about, when people say that Trump voters are deplorable people. Look, people who are in elected office and are corrupt through corporate money and special interests and all that, that's a completely different thing than somebody who just happens to believe that Trump is actually fighting for them. Going after voters is something I have never understood. Now, if you're talking about the Looney Tunes that are out there, again, you don't even have to go after them. They're out there. They expose themselves as the fools that they are.
All right. So this is what it is. So 14th Amendment, Section 3. No person shall be a senator or representative in Congress or elector of president and vice president, or hold any office, civil or military, under the United States or any other state, who, having previously taken an oath as a member, blah, 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 blah. Anyone who's taken the oath to support the Constitution shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same, or given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof. So Congress can, by a vote of 2/3 of each house, remove that, can remove him for that.
And then you're asking yourself,
I'm just saying, so that's pretty black and white.
Well, again, I still question whether you're going to find 17 GOP senators that are going to say, yeah, Trump.
Well, this is why I'm saying it all comes down to Mitch McConnell. If Mitch McConnell decides it's time for them to cut him loose, they'll find those senators. If Mitch McConnell doesn't want to cut him loose, then they won't find those senators. That's how it's going to work.
No, that's a fair point. And again, I'm not. I just think people still underestimate how popular Trump is with a significant part of what is currently the GOP base.
It is, but I really think that it's funny. We are really seeing civil wars within both parties. But what's interesting is the one in the GOP seems to be on class lines. Yeah. You have your like, we don't like Trump. He's mean tweets. We don't mind his policy. We don't mind him bombing people. We don't mind him screwing over people, but he has to be nice and pleasant about it. That's your Mitt Romney types, right? So that's like that elitist class. And then you've got your working class Republicans, which I would venture to say we have more in common with as progressives than not. And that's why I would really hope that the People's Party does reach out to working class people of labor people and not just leftists. But anyway.
We're in a situation.
Yeah, they're having a civil war. They're having a civil war in their party, and theirs definitely does seem to be drawn on class lines.
But I think that from the perspective of the corporate Democrats, they don't want there to be a civil war in the Republican Party, because when that happens, they can't make up the excuse that, the GOP is going to come and take everything. That's the reason why you can't have healthcare, you can't have stimulus checks, you can't have a living wage. There's always this excuse.
That's why they like them being in charge. So they definitely don't want them to implode, because if the Republicans implode, well, the truth is the Democrats seem to be imploding too. I'm not quite sure. But the question is, will we all rise up to basically overcome a crushing corporate duopoly? And that's what this is. I mean, these are not really parties that have missions or platforms. They really don't. I mean, and I have sort of reached the point where, and this was something Vaush said, and I know some people give me crap about liking Vaush, but I dig him. But when you look at what the GOP platform is, like when you look at what their policy ideals are, what they're really looking to do, really, it's just to hurt people. Really, that's all of the sole purpose of anybody and I'm talking in this country as what we call a conservative. It's really seemingly very mean-spirited and about hurting people. Now, that wouldn't be the case for conservatives in other countries. That's a different thing.
Well, our definition of conservatism in the United States is much different.
Let me be clear.
In other countries.
So, my friends across the pond, I'm not speaking to you if you are a conservative, but it's like they're pretty diabolical. Now, I think within the Democrats, you have that group that seems to be running the party that really are with them. And they've gotten to hide out as the controlled opposition, as if the Democrats are somehow different. And I think those people are starting to be more and more revealed as to who they are.
Well, Pelosi got exposed the other day when she was interviewed by Leslie Stahl and didn't like the fact that they questioned, why didn't you give the people the $2,000 stimulus checks in what now would amount to almost 3 months ago? Think about how much that could have helped people in struggling right now. But for them, it's all about it's all about playing politics. It doesn't matter how many. I'm telling you, there are people who sit in a room and they ultimately decide, 25,000 people die, no big deal. It's as long as we stay in power. That's the most important thing to them. But now we're in a very unique situation as we hit news and amuse.
And we don't even have much time to start. So, we're not the best with keeping track of our time.
No, but we're going to rapid fire here. And it's very important that we talk about the fact that Bernie Sanders is now going to be the chair of the Senate Budget Committee. And that's very important because now Bernie really is in control of what can and cannot get through a Biden administration, specifically when it comes to major policy. And one of the things that Bernie has made very clear that he's going to be fighting for is a unique tool called reconciliation, which means that you will not have the prerequisite 60 votes necessary, because we still have the filibuster, in order to push through major legislation. And Bernie has made it clear that the two primary legislation pieces that he's looking at are stimulus checks and universal health care. And whatever capacity that ends up being in, that's great, because that's what we need. We desperately need universal health care and stimulus checks, or UBI. You could call it whatever you want. But to me, having Bernie in that position, if it's going to be in a Biden administration, it's the best possible scenario that we could have hoped for, all things being considered. Now, why he got chosen for that position, I don't know if it was a seniority type situation, whatever it may have been.
I don't even know if is this like a real position or sort of like a title position? You know, is this somebody that really has control, or is it just sort of just somebody who's just a title? Like, I don't know.
I would think that Bernie is serious about this, and I think he understands how desperate the country is right now. And if that means that he's got to go to war, so to speak, then that's what he's going to do. I think that he understands just how volatile this situation really is, but he really is in a position of power. He's not in a situation where, I'm not saying you could just wield a magic wand and all of a sudden things are going to be okay. But what I am saying is that Bernie does recognize the veracity of the circumstance. And that's why he is making it clear. He's making it known that I'm here to fight, and I'm going to make things difficult, even on you. Well, of course, I'm going to make it difficult.
All right. So let's briefly, okay. So that's the Bernie picture.
Yes. But again, it leads into what I think is another component of News and Amuse, which is important. And that is Andrew Yang, who has been championing universal basic income, which in this case is monthly stimulus checks. He's been championing it for several years now. As a matter of fact, I bought his book. Haven't started reading it yet, but I'm about to. You know, he just officially launched his mayoral campaign today.
We're going to get him on. We're going to get him to come on sometime between now and his election.
Yeah, the election is in June. And of course, Andrew thinks very highly of Jen. He's already made it clear he wants to come on the podcast, which is great. We'd love for you to go on Yang Speaks.
Wow.
But I think Andrew is probably going to save that if you ultimately end up running again and have you go on then, which probably makes sense. But nevertheless,
you shouldn't say things like that.
I know, but I don't want to
say things like that.
No jinxing, no jinxing. But ultimately, Andrew is, again, is he the perfect candidate? No. But I think he's the right candidate for the right moment.
This is what I've been saying. And also I want to, point out that my former BNC slate mate, Lauren Ashcraft, is supporting a candidate. And what is
Diana Morales?
Diana Morales, who is also running for mayor, who is, if Lauren's behind her, I'm sure that's the progressive. And so, I just think it's nice that there's I now can say there are two decent candidates running for mayor of New York. That's really cool. And what I've always said about somebody like Andrew Yang is you don't have to agree with him on all the policies. He is somebody who is a person of reason and science and fairness. And he's just somebody who also has no problem listening to experts and taking advice and knowing what he knows and knowing what he doesn't know. And it's really very refreshing. So my thoughts are, for anyone in New York, don't discount him. And again, I'm not speaking anything about Diana Morales. I don't know anything about her. She's probably great.
She's definitely not the person who came and had the corporate media in New York write a hit piece in Politico on Andrew and take completely out of context.
Well, that only means they're scared of him.
Oh, absolutely.
So apparently what they were saying something about him, like they were mocking him and trying to make him out to be elitist because he said it was difficult to have kids home at school in a 2-bedroom apartment with both parents working from home.
Oh, yes.
Yes, that's so elitist to think a 2-bedroom apartment with 2 kids and 2 parents home working is just difficult.
Considering
if that's the best they got on him,
considering everything that he's done to help people, the fact that he had Humanity Forward raise $1 million and give it to struggling families, I believe in the Bronx. Look, like you said, politics is a blood sport, but Andrew has really tried to defy logic, kind of like Bernie in a lot of ways, which is I'm not going to attack anybody. I'm going to be me and I'm going to fight for what I believe in. And that in itself is what will define whether or not he becomes the next mayor of New York City. Now, I think he would be completely different than most when it comes to his position as mayor of New York City in terms of his reach to the entire country. There are people that do become very well known over the course of that time. You remember, obviously, when Giuliani was mayor, he was considered America's mayor.
Yeah, whatever.
Again, we don't want to.
That is
compare
only
those two
because
things.
9/11 happened
Correct.
during his tenure.
Correct.
It would have been anybody who was there at that time. I really believe that's one of those, you were in the right place at the right time. Otherwise, you'd be nothing.
No, I'm not disagreeing with that. But what I am saying is that if Andrew's intention is to take this as far as he can and take his message as far as he can, becoming the mayor of New York City is infinitely better than having a cabinet position in the Biden administration. That's my opinion, and I'm sticking to that.
And honestly, I don't know that that's Andrew would probably be doing whatever it is he thinks is the best way for him to contribute what his skills are to help the most people. Like that's what he's going to be thinking about. And I would venture that maybe his thoughts on serving on a Biden administration, he might not feel would be as effective as him doing something like being a mayor of a very massive city in terms of the amount of people he'll actually be able to help. That's what I would think.
No, listen, I agree with you. I don't think there's really much that you can say other than he put out a great launch video. He is definitely going to work. Richie Torres, who is the new congressional representative of District 15, I believe, the neighboring district of Ocasio-Cortez's, he has already come out in support of him. He's going to be one of the campaign co-chairs. So Andrew is definitely in it to win it, and he's definitely got some interesting people.
I'm curious to see if AOC gets involved in that.
I think my guess is that she's probably not going to get involved.
No.
Especially if Andrew becomes somewhat of a runaway freight train. And there's nothing to take away from, especially Diana Morales, but you have a couple of other candidates, particularly, obviously you have Springer, who's probably the establishment favorite, along with the other lady, Eli, I think is her name. But it's going to be a very interesting race. And again, the fact that Andrew has been championing the basic income leads us to what is going to be the future of our economy? And another component that has to be talked about is modern monetary theory, the idea of a federal jobs guarantee, the idea that, as we have seen over the course of COVID, the government is a currency issuer, which means they can print money as needed for the people. And of course, they printed the money as needed for the very rich and powerful. Time to bail out Main Street instead of bailing out Wall Street. Now, we have a wonderful guest who is going to come on here. Gentleman who happened to have been part of the brand new Congress summit in DC when Jen was brought in as a candidate and had the opportunity to learn some very interesting things.
I did. And you know what, even at the time, and I even think I remember saying this at the time, I'm going to just own this, that when I hear this stuff, I start to hear the teacher from Charlie Brown. I do. I don't completely understand it. I probably never will completely understand it. And I'm okay with that. See, that's okay. I don't have to completely understand it. I don't completely understand a lot of things. So, but with that being said, I'm going to do my best to really try to understand it this time. And so this is Fadhel. Hi.
Hi, Jen. How are you? Good to see you.
How are you?
Good. Thanks for having me on.
Much for jumping in. I know it was like a last minute thing. I don't know if you heard, but our guest was supposed to be Steve Grumbine, and I don't know if you realize that he's in the hospital with COVID.
Yeah, I was actually, I don't think he's in the hospital anymore. He's at home. I hope he's not back in the hospital.
Oh, good. No, good. Then that's better.
Yeah. He's recovering, but it's really hard. So wish him the best.
So thank you for jumping in. And so do you want to like segue UBI? Do you want to why don't you just introduce yourself? Like introduce yourself, say what you like, who you are, and that you're not just some random guy coming on that people should listen to about. Well, you could just be somebody sitting in the next room for all they know.
So my name is Fadhel Kaboub. I teach economics at Denison University here in Ohio. And I'm the president of the Global Institute for Sustainable Prosperity, which is a public policy think tank that does a lot of work around issues of full employment, sustainability, climate change, and MMT, modern monetary theory. I've been involved in a lot of the kind of economic policy side of the progressive movement over the last few years, primarily answering the question, how do you pay for the progressive policy agenda? All of these wonderful, bold, transformative ideas that we know will be impactful and meaningful in people's lives. Where does the money come from? How do we pay for it? And the traditional answer from the mainstream of the economics profession has always been, well, it would be nice to have all of these things, but it's too bad we just don't have the money, because the money comes from two potential sources. The federal government can either tax the population to pay for it, tax the rich, tax polluters, tax the wealthy, and all of that stuff. Or we can borrow from financial markets. So the government issues bonds, US treasuries. But the problem with borrowing is eventually the government will have to pay for it, right? So eventually, sooner or later, we're going to have to tax somebody and spend less, tighten our belts in order to pay for the national debt. Well, the problem with this explanation is that it has nothing to do with the reality of how the federal government actually spends. This so-called sound finance approach, which usually refers to how you and I spend, right? You and I are users of the dollar. We don't create it into existence. So you and I have to work hard, earn an income first, then we can spend it. And we can spend beyond our income potentially if we borrow from a bank or a friend or a credit card company. But then we have a real debt, and that's a real financial burden that we must pay at some point, either by earning more income, working harder, or spending less, or doing both. So that is true for you and I. That is true for businesses, for nonprofits, for your states and municipalities. They too have to spend and live within their means. But the federal government, the sovereign issue of the currency, doesn't have to follow the same principles because it can spend its own money into existence, which means it can have large deficits. It can have a large national debt without necessarily causing bankruptcy or causing hyperinflation or any of that. So that raises the question, what is the actual limit of spending that the government has? Because MMT never...
People jump in on this and they're like, people mock this and say, oh, those progressives, they think we could just print all the money we want and just put out all this money. And that does sound not correct, right? Like it sounds kind of, how can that be true? But yeah.
Right. And I when I explain this, I always have to repeat it twice just to make sure everybody heard me, that I never said, and anybody in the MMT community, we never said that government spending is unlimited, that the printing of money is unlimited. There is a real limit, but the limit is not tax revenues, and it's not the borrowing that financial markets will allow the government to have. That is true for states and municipalities, not for the federal government. The real limit to how much the federal government can spend is the risk of inflation, the potential risk of inflation. Right. So now we're talking. So then what determines that risk of inflation? How do we know where that limit is? Well, it has two potential sources. One is we can have inflation if the productive capacity of the economy, the number of skilled people and machines and equipment and real physical resources is limited. Once we exceed that limit, then we get into the inflation pressure point. The good news about that is that productive capacity is producible. We can train more doctors and nurses and engineers and teachers. We can build more hospitals and ventilators. And the good news is that it produces millions of jobs. But it does require strategic planning. We can't just walk into it and hope for the best, right? We have to plan. We have an industrial policy. We have to have healthcare policy, educational policy. This is where you can actually expand the productive capacity strategically without bumping into that inflation limit. So that's sort of the easier part of the strategy. The next part, the source of inflation that really matters, that many of us in the progressive movement and many people have campaigned for on this front, and this is very important for us, is the risk of inflation that is derived from having too much market power, abusive pricing behavior. In other words, you have companies who actually can raise prices, cause inflation, simply because they can. In other words, because lawmakers let them. Think of the health insurance companies, think of Wall Street, big pharma, big oil, big tech. All of these companies have too much corporate power. And the reason they have it is because the lawmakers that we elect to Washington, D.C., who have the responsibility to tax and regulate those companies and to democratize the market have essentially abdicated that responsibility because their elections depend on super PAC money and campaign contributions from those who control the market. So now we have a problem, not just in the economy, not just in terms of inflation. This is a problem for democracy. So how do we tame that risk of inflation? We can't tame it by saying, oh, we shouldn't spend because we'll go bankrupt. The only way to tame that risk of inflation is by taxing and regulating their market power out of existence. And that takes 535 people who are willing to do it in DC.
Right.
And
So
now if you do that, I'll finish here, you actually push that potential risk of inflation further and further away, and you stop the suffocation of the economy, which is what we have right now. So that's how we pay for all of these progressive programs. And it's not, I'll close with this one, because a lot of people say, well, we told you so, we need to tax them so we can have the money. No, 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 no. We don't need to tax them. We don't need their money or their permission to have a Green New Deal. But we should tax the hell out of them, right? Not because we need their money or their permission, because we want to decarbonize the economy, tax oil companies and fossil fuel companies. We want to stabilize the system, the financial system. We should tax speculation out of existence. We should tax the ultra-rich oligarchs, not because we need their permission, but because we want to protect democracy from oligarchy. We want to reduce their power and influence in politics. So that's what it means when we say take money out of politics. It's not because we need their money. It's because we need them to get out of the system so we can have a true democracy where we have a government of the people, by the people, for the people, not a government of the super PACs, for the super PACs, by the super PACs.
So really, MMT works hand in hand with significant government regulation of corporate influence. I mean, that has to happen at the same time.
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, this has to happen before we even start the spending. So my worst nightmare is to have, somebody hijack the label of the Green New Deal and the progressive agenda and do all the spending without doing any of the taxing and regulation, and then have inflation actually kick in, and they say, oh, we told you this big expensive program is going to cause inflation, so now we can't afford it, let's cut spending. Right? So we have to actually start with a very clear vision from the beginning, saying, guess what? We have two important things to do. They're not linked. They're decoupled. Remember AOC when she says we're going to decouple spending from taxes? Yeah. Everybody's heads in DC exploded. What do you mean by decoupling the two? We thought that one pays for the other. Well, once you decouple it, you really have a truly progressive agenda going here. So we're going to spend on the national priorities. And the priorities have, in my mind, three layers. One is universal public services, health, education, transportation, broadband, all of these things. And that's going to create millions of jobs. And these are jobs, not minimum wage jobs, pay scale, salaries, benefits, you name it. So that's kind of the foundation. The next layer is for people who actually want to work, a job guarantee at a living wage for individuals who can't find work in the private sector. And then the third layer is a generous income support system, call it basic income or whatever, social security system, where people who can't work for a variety of reasons will be able to have access to universal public services that everybody has, plus a generous income support to live with dignity. So those are the three layers of public policy that a country like the US can afford. Why can't we afford it right now? Because we have the system that's being suffocated by corporate power, by corruption, and because we're told that we're out of money, right? Yeah. Even President Obama, ran on a campaign, yes, we can, yes, we can. As soon as he got into office, he said, Uncle Sam is broke. We can't. We don't have the money, right? And Wall Street wouldn't let us borrow more.
No, just to bail out the rich people. What really made this kind of a little bit clearer for me was I remember, I don't know if it was a graphic that you had or something, but it was like, if we were to imagine that the tax dollars coming in were actual physical cash, that's not then going to turn around and go pay for things. That's going to get burned and then new money gets printed anyway. So like the connection between taxes coming in and money being spent is completely non-existent. And that was really I was able to get a visual on that. Sure. And it made sense to me.
Well, I'll give you two very simple examples that most people would understand and connect with. One very old and one really new, recent. So I'll start with the recent one, the CARES Act, right? Remember, just a few days before the CARES Act, before the pandemic, before the whole thing, came down, people in DC and all over the country were saying to you and other candidates, well, we can't pay for the Green New Deal. We can't have this progressive agenda. We just don't have the money. All of a sudden, the pandemic hits and 535 people get together on the Hill and decide this is a national priority. And all of a sudden, $2.2 trillion appeared. And they didn't say who they had to tax for it or who they had to borrow from for it. Right around the same time, Mnuchin and the president came out and said, you know what, April 15th is around the corner. That's tax day. Don't worry about it. We don't even need your tax dollars. We're going to postpone that to July 15th. How many people in the Senate, voted for the CARES Act and before their vote said, well, we're going to have to cut this other program in order to pay for this? Right. Nobody. It was a unanimous vote. There's only 4 people who didn't vote because either they had COVID or they were exposed to COVID, so they couldn't be there for the vote. It was unanimous, right? So that's the CARES Act. Absolutely true. The government spent money into existence in order to provide economic relief. The other bigger example that we know from history is how we paid for World War II. Right?
How we pay for war now? How do we pay for that now?
Well, as a matter of fact, my point is that this is how the federal government always spends. They just use this excuse when it comes to social services, when it comes to climate policy, when it comes to the things that matter to you and I. They say, you know what, we already paid for the military, we paid for this, for that, and now we're out of money. So too bad, we're going to have to cut spending on health and infrastructure and education. How did we pay for World War II? The most expensive program in U.S. history, in world history. It came right after the Great Depression. The country was broke. Millions of people were suffering, and there is no money to be taxed, no money to be borrowed in the U.S. or internationally. It's not like the rest of the world was thriving. And all of a sudden, a national priority is on the table, which is entering the war. And all of a sudden, nobody even dared to mention the idea that we should spend carefully, that we should spend incrementally. Well, maybe we should send them 10,000 troops and see if we can scare away the Nazis. Nobody said that. Of course, you had to enter with a massive amount of force, which meant massive amount of war production, to the point that we had to shut down production of consumer goods. We had to go into double and triple shifts nonstop to keep up with the war effort. And that meant we paid millions of workers decent wages, and now they could have gone out on a shopping spree to buy a car, to buy a house, to buy whatever. It's a free country. But we didn't even have new cars or new homes for them because everybody was producing for the war. So what happened then? Paying for the war was spending money into existence in order to produce all of that stuff. The challenge at the time was, how do we convince those patriots to not go out and spend and cause inflation? So we decided to sell them war bonds, freedom bonds, kind of leveraging the patriotic mood of the nation and saying, you know what, you're supporting the war effort, give us $10,000, we'll give you this piece of paper called war bond from the US Treasury. We promise to pay you back in 10 years plus interest, guaranteed, AAA rated, government guaranteed. But what you're actually doing is that you as a consumer, you're abstaining from consumption. And you're waiting until after the war to buy that car, to buy that house. That's how we dealt with the risk of inflation. We didn't borrow from those individuals because the government needed their money to pay for the war. The war was already paid for. The challenge was, how do we convince people not to spend right now, because we literally don't have any productive capacity to build new homes or new cars, right? And we had to do price controls. I mean, it was extreme measures, but nobody at the time, even the mainstream economists at the time, nobody thought that we didn't have money to pay for the war. Everybody was talking about, how do we mobilize the real productive resources? And how do we control corporations so that they actually produce for the war? Which meant that we had to use the power of the purse and the power of Congress to regulate the corporate entities, to take over Detroit, essentially, and make it part of the military industrial complex for the purposes of the war at the time. We can do that again. We can do it during peacetime, right? For good purposes. We don't have to invade any other country to do that.
So essentially, we've been having that for years. We've been having modern monetary theory for war for years. Like, that's just how it works for the things that the wealthy people want to do.
Fidel,
And that's and that's why in MMT we always say it's not like MMT is something new that you have to apply. MMT just shines the bright light on how the system currently works and says, wait a minute, we don't actually have to do it this way. We can actually make the system much more democratic. Remember, a government of the people, by the people, for the people. And we have the productive capacity, we have the technology, we have all the resources to thrive as a society in an equitable, just, and sustainable way.
Fidel, I just finished reading The Deficit Myth by Stephanie Kelton. Very informative book. It definitely deserves all the accolades that it's getting. I think the thing that hasn't been touched on yet, but is a very important point as to why modern monetary theory works, is taking us off the gold standard from 1973 with Richard Nixon. If you could talk about that and the difference of, relying on gold as, a means of valuing the dollar versus not having it. What is the difference now, and how does that change the perspective of, as a currency issuer, which our nation is, and for those who don't know, there's only a handful of currency issuers in the entire country. One of the reasons why Greece, the reason, for those who don't understand, Fidel, I'm sure you'll explain this much better than me, the biggest reason why Greece ultimately went into bankruptcy is because they were no longer a currency issuer, so they couldn't bail themselves out. They were dependent on the euro, which they couldn't produce, and they were basically allowed to just go bankrupt. So if you could talk about the value of being a currency issuer and not having to rely on the gold standard, how that ultimately allows modern monetary theory to work in the current economic environment we're living in.
Absolutely. So if you're a country on a gold standard like the US was, like many countries were at the time, it means that the value of your currency is tied by price to gold, which means the more gold you accumulate as a nation, the more money you can actually spend into the system. And typically what happened for countries who are constrained by that physical, quantity of gold, they had to earn a lot of it in order to expand their economy and power and influence, which meant they had to acquire it somehow, either by invading other countries, colonizing other countries and taking their gold so they can expand their power, or by earning it through trade, international trade. And that was the mercantilist system where everybody was obsessed with a trade surplus thing, with a trade surplus strategy. The problem was that it was extremely destabilizing from a national security perspective and from an international trade perspective. And to some extent, this is actually what led to World War II. So what happened between World War I and World War II, because all of those European countries were on the gold standard, they had an incentive to cheat. So if I devalue my currency, let's say I'm Germany, and I devalue my currency against the British pound or the Italian lira or whatever, then I artificially make my exports cheaper than the French and British and the Italians. So then I start exporting more into their economy, and I get gold in return, and I can accumulate more economic and military power. And they lose, their economy loses jobs and so on. So of course, to retaliate, the British will do the same, and the Italians will do the same. They'll artificially inflate their economy, devalue their currency, and try to make their economies become bigger exporters. So this competitive devaluation, that we call it currency wars, trade wars, eventually translates into actual wars. And it's very destabilizing because as a business, if you're trying to export or import commodities or goods or agriculture or whatever, you want to know what's going to be the price of the thing that you're producing in 3 weeks and 6 weeks and 6 months when you deliver it. Otherwise, you can't price your things, and you lose a lot of money in that thing. It's very destructive, right? So most countries, when they decide to go into a big spending program, when they decide to go into a war, they can't keep their currency tied to gold, because if they ran out of gold, they ran out of money and they ran out of economic activity. So that's what the US did. The US gave up the gold standard before the war so we can enter the war. And when you give up the gold standard, it means your money becomes fiat money, which means a dollar is a dollar. It doesn't have any intrinsic value. It's just a piece of paper. It's worth nothing, physically speaking, other than what the government says it's worth. A dollar is worth a dollar, and it commands purchasing power based on the productive capacity of the economy, based on the authority of the government to regulate the system, to keep out fraud and abuse from the system and so on. So our monetary system is a fiat money system. A dollar is a dollar bill. It's not backed by gold or anything. Now, does that mean that all countries who can print their own currency into existence, a fiat currency, can have unlimited spending capacity? Of course not. Like I said earlier, your spending capacity is determined by your productive capacity and by how competitive your market. If you have, abusive price setters who take advantage of the system. Well, different countries have different degrees of spending capacity. The US happens to have the biggest one, the US, Japan, the UK, and so on. But developing countries who have very limited productive capacity also have very limited spending capacity. Otherwise, they bump into the inflation barrier that we talked about. But as you mentioned, countries like Greece, a country like Ecuador, countries that completely gave up their national sovereignty to a foreign authority like the European Central Bank, or Ecuador, which dollarized its economy. They actually use the US dollar as the national currency. So they literally are the equivalent of the state of Florida, of the state of Ohio. They are currency users. They have to earn dollars just like you and I by taxing their population or by exporting to the rest of the world. They can borrow from lenders, but they can't spend money into existence like the federal government in the US or national governments in Australia, Canada, and Japan, and so on. So when you hear people saying we need to fix the value of the dollar to gold and go back to the gold standard and all those gold bug type of stories and metaphors, it's the worst thing you can imagine, right? Is to artificially constrain our spending because we think a piece of paper, a dollar bill, must have some intrinsic market value. Otherwise, it's destabilizing.
Right.
Well, I've been told that my mic is not coming in too strong, but hopefully you guys can hear me now because I'm going to amplify my voice a little bit.
Oh my God, that's not what we need. That is not what we need.
You could talk about, obviously, right now, one of the hallmarks of Trump's presidency was the so-called war with China. And, what is it that I think is the primary concern when it comes to any of these so-called trade wars, I believe, is the fact that we're trying to import versus export is really not the issue. It's obviously it's a definitive description that is utilized by Kelton in the book. But what I think needs to be talked about more is dealing with countries that either have a living wage versus do not have a living wage. And quite frankly, in a lot of the countries we do trade with, they have slave wages. And that is one of the biggest problems that we face on the national level when it comes to, the job losses in America. You cannot compete. When you have the issues of people saying, oh, well, the Mexicans are coming here taking our jobs. Do you think anybody wants to work for $3 an hour? But when you're so desperate, you're basically willing to take anything. So if you could talk about a living wage and how that plays a role in modern monetary theory, if it does at all, for that matter.
Well, it's not necessarily a direct implication of MMT, but we have, as economists, we have opinions and views about all kinds of things. So you're absolutely right. What matters is not who's exporting and who's importing. We need to shift the narrative and focus on the metric that really matters. What matters is, do we have living wage jobs in the U.S.? Do we have benefits in the U.S.? Do we deliver goods and services in a sustainable way? Bringing a piece of salad, on a truck from 3,000 miles away is not a very good idea, right? And we finally recognize that. Not having the capacity to produce masks and ventilators and life-saving equipment domestically, we've all recognized now it's not a very good idea, right? But there's all kinds of other things. That doesn't mean we should stop international trade altogether. But we as the United States, as the most influential economy, the most influential superpower in the system, somehow the federal government, in all of its superpower internationally, we decided, what, we can actually have influence on our allies and trading partners when it comes to geopolitical issues, when it comes to, we pick and choose, obviously, which human rights matter at which time to apply that pressure. But somehow we have no influence when it comes to labor standards or environmental standards or or all of these things. Even as I said, human rights matter occasionally. It depends on who you are and where you are in the world. So we have to recognize that we can't, just use this influence and power only to abuse other economies and allow them to race to the bottom, because we've stranded them with so much external debt. We've stranded them with so many constraints, and we take advantage of that. Now, who actually benefits from this race to the bottom? Is it workers in the US? Of course not. And is it Walmart? Yeah, absolutely. Is it Amazon? Absolutely, because you're manufacturing stuff at slave wages somewhere else and horrible conditions, and then you're bringing all of the cheap plastic stuff to the US so that workers who are not earning living wages can actually afford to survive by buying stuff from Walmart, right? And you can't complain because, hey, we're making the stuff cheap for you. So you get a miserable wage, but you get also cheap stuff to consume, to feel like you're in a middle class status. So this is a multifaceted, multidimensional problem that can't be dealt with just one policy, right? And that's why we need all of these transformative programs. That's why we advocate for a Green New Deal that's multifaceted. That's why we have to have, changes in healthcare and education and infrastructure and minimum wage standards and retirement benefits, and in agricultural policy and international trade policies. All of these pieces interlock. And the situation we're in today didn't happen overnight. That happened over decades on all of these fronts, that we've lost all of these battles internationally as working class people, as labor unions. And now we have to restore the fabric that allows people to thrive both in the US and globally.
Yeah, I think everyone overlooks this concept of intersectionality when it comes to things like this. And it's really, and I think that's also why we have failed so many times in terms of why it takes so long to get certain things right. Like, I'm sort of having this epiphany. It's like, when you have all the pieces sort of moving independently of each other, that's not how things are going to work well. Like, that's not how it's going to work. And so it's interesting that this is not more like, this has to be talked about more, the concept of the relatedness of all of these different issues, because I think you're right. And I think that the idea would be, okay, let's throw them a bone. Let's give them this one thing. And when that fails, which it would if it doesn't have the other things to go with it, then we could just say, oh, look, that doesn't work. And it's really, it's complicated.
So this is, you just prompted me to go in a direction that I'm very passionate about. So if we have a minute, let's put this on the table. If we're talking about global issues, let's be honest. And we talk about justice issues in the US, a Green New Deal for the US. That's great if we're successful, but it's not going to be enough, because guess what? Global warming is a global issue. Yeah. It's not enough for the US to do it here and the rest of the world not to do it. So if you accept what MMT says, that different countries have different spending capacity, it just so happens that the global north, the richest countries, have actually the largest spending capacity to implement Green New Deals all over the world. They have also technological advantages to actually decarbonize the economy and really move us rapidly in the right direction. The global south doesn't have the technology, doesn't have the spending capacity. On top of this, there's a very simple fact that we must address if we're going to do this globally. If you take the world and divide it into global north and global south, rich and poor countries, and you net out all the transactions, financial transactions, exports, imports, foreign trade, charity, interest payments, debt cancellation, you name it, all the transactions annually, we find that the most recent numbers we have, $2 trillion moved from the global south, the poorest countries, to the global north. We're actually extracting $2 trillion a year from the poorest countries. And that number is not new. It's been always money moving from the poorest to the richest countries for the last at least 20 years. And the number is growing. So when we have this conversation in a few years, it's going to be $10 trillion a year or whatever. So that is unsustainable politically, economically, ecologically, ethically. The system will break when it comes to this issue. So we need to reverse that somehow, right? So I've been thinking about how do we reverse that and make a legal case for it, a moral, ethical, economic case for it. We can't just say, well, you know what, this is not good. Let's just reverse the flow. The system is set up, is designed to have the money and wealth extracted from the poorest countries. So look at climate change, for example. who is the most responsible for CO2 emissions since the Industrial Revolution? That's the global North, primarily.
The military-industrial complex, but yeah.
Well, that's part of it too. But it's the global North in general.
Yeah,
even if you look at China and India in recent years, because they're also major contributors in the last couple of decades. If you look at why they're major contributors, because they're producing for the global North. Right. So the actual carbon footprint is the responsibility of the global North.
Right.
So we can talk about climate debt. And as a result, we can talk about climate reparations as direct transfer of monetary resources and technological resources to global South in order to reverse that flow and accelerate the transition globally. The second piece of the puzzle for reversing that flow is colonial reparations, the neo-colonial reparations, the extraction of wealth from the developing world. Same thing, it's the global North that's responsible for it. So we can lay out a global framework that says, you know what, we're all in this together. We're not going to save the planet by just having a handful of countries try to fight climate change. It's going to be everybody, and we have to do it really rapidly, as in World War II type mobilization times 10. And we have to do it not just as the global North, we're in charge and we're going to do charity to the global South. This is an issue of justice. That's why I insist on calling it reparations, because we're not going to move forward without true reconciliation, not just reconciliation verbally, but true reconciliation in terms of repairing the broken system and repairing the damage to indigenous communities in the global South, to indigenous communities in this country, to people who suffered from slavery for generations and structural racism. So every country has to deal with its own history internally, and the global North as a whole has to deal with its collective history with the global South. And it's not history from hundreds of years ago.
Yeah, no.
It is still happening to this day.
Right. No, that's great. The idea of climate reparations in terms of what we've done. And I definitely look at it as we just keep extracting everything from the poor countries, getting them to work for lower wages, and then helping our economy in the process. And I think that, how can we even talk about reparations so long as we're still doing it? Like, we need to stop doing that, obviously. And I think that awareness is key. Do you want to do this question?
Yeah, Fadhel, we do have a question from Kenneth Goodson who says, if they don't need my taxes to generate money, then why is the new administration planning on raising my taxes? Not trying to be rude, obviously just curious about the role of
Very good question. I'm glad that Kenneth is watching and is asking this very important question. Well, Kenneth, you know what? Now that you heard this conversation, and now that maybe you'll be picking up Stephanie Kelton's book to read, The Deficit Myth, now you can call their bluff. Now you know that they don't actually have to raise your taxes to pay for it, right? And this is really this pay-as-you-go system that Nancy Pelosi and others have established within the Democratic Party, kind of tying their own hand, is the most dangerous thing that we're facing right now. Even though this year they decided, you know what, we're going to tame this rule a little bit for climate purposes, for pandemic purposes, but it's still going to apply for everything else that the government does. That is, pay as you go essentially says we're not going to increase spending on anything unless we can generate tax revenues to pay for it, or unless we can cut some other program, right? So call their bluff, meaning MMT very clearly says that the government doesn't actually need to tax X to pay for Y. We decouple the taxing from spending. It doesn't mean we shouldn't tax. We should tax the rich. We should tax polluters. We should tax Wall Street, but not because we need their money or their permission, but because we want to decarbonize and democratize the economy and protect the democratic system from oligarchy, which means they don't actually have to tax working class people, middle class people in order to pay for services. Right? That's the ruse that they use to keep us down, to keep us constrained, and to keep, the oligarchs in charge of the system. So yes, tax, but not because we need that money to pay for a particular program. We're going to have deficits, right? MMT is saying deficits are important, but deficits are not unlimited, right? We have that inflation risk constraint. And if you look at Stephanie's book, one of the last few chapters is about the deficits that matter. Right? It's not the national debt. It's not the annual federal government deficit. It's the educational deficits, the infrastructure deficits, the healthcare deficits, the climate debt, right? The student debt, the medical debts, those are the debts and deficits that matter. So we should shift the reference points away from the obsession with the national debt and the deficit, and focus on things that really matter to our quality of life, which means we're going to have to rely on the common sense of the average person. Let's call him the average Joe. For example, what does the average Joe understand? The average Joe knows that we would rather spend money today on cleaning the water source and cleaning air by investing in clean air and clean technology and renewable energy. Or if we decide, well, it's too expensive, we can't afford it, guess what, average Joe? We're going to pay for it many times over for the next 30, 50 years by paying for everybody's, cancer treatment for the next 50 years, because that's cheaper or that's better. Of course it's not. Wouldn't we rather, this is the average Joe common sense again, wouldn't we rather invest in after school programs and summer camps to inspire kids with music and theater and sports and coding and all the great things that will allow them to thrive? Or not do that because it's too expensive. We can't afford the coaches. We can't afford the summer camps. And then what do we do for the next 30 years? Build prisons and pay for the opioid crisis and pay for the pain for society and for families, because that's cheaper or that's more affordable? Of course it's not. So common sense is everything we're talking about in the Green New Deal, that's actually the cheap version. And the cheap version, compared to all of these hidden costs over the next 30, 50 years, the cheap version happens to be the version that gives us millions of good paying jobs, that gives us better quality of life, cleaner air, cleaner everything. Plus, we deal with the roots of the problem instead of paying for it and getting no jobs and getting no quality of life and dealing with the emotional and economic pain that many families suffer from. So that's common sense to me. So if we shift the narrative and focus on the things that matter and the average person knows matter, then this thing we call the national debt and the deficit become secondary issues that we know how to manage. We managed them during World War II. We managed them for the last 10 years. We have the tools to manage these things we call the national debt and the deficit, and we can make them irrelevant permanently if we focus on the things that matter.
Fadhel, if you could talk about the importance of modern monetary theory as it relates to an infrastructure bill, particularly one that, you want to call it the Green New Deal, or if you want to call it just one that focuses primarily on clean energy jobs. I mean, I think
I'd be happy with building our bridges and our sewage past the past 60 years of decay.
That's the whole point.
We have basic infrastructure. Like, I don't even understand how we could be talking about creating a new infrastructure when our old infrastructure is just not right. Like, we've got a serious underground sewage issue in Fort Lauderdale with the the pipes are old. So we can't even get the train from here to Orlando. We're so behind.
I mean, an infrastructure bill in the state of Florida alone would be tremendous for the economy.
We have to go back so far.
And I would think that modern monetary theory makes perfect sense for an infrastructure bill because it does pay for itself and it creates the jobs. If it's focused on clean energy jobs, we're reducing our carbon footprint. And we are essentially creating a federal jobs guarantee. We are giving people the opportunity to work. And quite frankly, with having a D+ rating by the engineers,
it's
needless
sad
to say, this is not a 1 or 2 year project. This is like a decade-long project we have to undertake, but we should be undertaking right now.
Well, we're going to be underwater. So
if we don't,
literally here, we are going to be underwater.
Really
so it's a problem.
So if you could talk about MMT as it relates to an infrastructure bill, that would be great.
Absolutely. So number one, this can't be the responsibility of the state of Florida or local municipalities. It's just not going to happen. They don't have the spending capacity. They're going to have to raise tax revenues or borrow, and that's just not going to do it at this point. And it's not like this is the first time we've done it. This is why we go back to the New Deal of the 1930s that actually built the infrastructure of this country that we're talking about now. That's 100 years old infrastructure that needs to be upgraded. Back in the day, everybody thought, well, bringing electricity to remote rural areas, that's just not financially reasonable. And guess what? We set up the rural electrification program and we built highways and infrastructure and water treatment system and so on. And all of those assets are still available and in use today. There's a great website called the livingnewdeal.org or .com website that has actual physical pictures and addresses of things in your own community that were built by the New Deal administration, by WPA workers, your local post office, probably your local water and sewer system, your local state parks and national parks. All of these things are massively productive and have paid for themselves many times over in terms of the tourism they bring and the quality of life and economic activity they bring. We just, lost that tradition and gave up on that tradition because we were told we can't afford it and that's too expensive. We should let the private sector do it. And Jen, on your point that Florida will be underwater, the good news in this, it's not about being underwater, is that the financial industry is finally not just aware of it, but they're actually pushing the panic button behind closed doors right now. I don't know if you've seen this leaked report from JP Morgan about a year ago that actually said, this climate risk about that the IPCC talking about, the IPCC report that says we need to decarbonize rapidly, they said those guys are actually very optimistic. It's much, much worse than that. Why? Because the financial industry, they're in the business of investing in properties, lending money, mortgages, insurance, and so on. So if you get a mortgage today, somewhere in Florida, on the coast, for example, your 30-year mortgage will be what today is 2021. Your last payment will be due in 2051 or 52 or whatever, right? So what the Union of Concerned Scientists have done a couple years ago, they did a study on climate change and coastal properties in the U.S. And they picked the year 2045 as the target date, just to see what happens within the lifetime of a mortgage that you would sign today. Right. They found that we have $1 trillion worth of properties that will be flooded permanently and that will become stranded assets. A stranded asset, its value goes from hundreds of millions of dollars to zero because it's underwater, because it's useless. So now if you're getting a mortgage and 2045 is within the lifetime of that mortgage, then you're on the hook for that. If you're a lender, if you're a borrower, if you're an insurance company, if you're a developer. So now they know this is not some futuristic event. This is actually happening right now.
Yeah,
so the good news is that
those mortgages, they're not getting 30-year mortgages down there on the beach.
Exactly.
Jen happens to be from a town called North Miami Beach.
Yeah.
Anytime, and I mean anytime, it rains just a couple of inches,
it's floods.
It's basically
yeah. I mean, it's pretty common.
This area has not taken a direct hit of a hurricane in a long time.
No.
But God forbid it does, it's going to be really bad. Really.
So the good news about this is that the financial industry is going to push the government to build infrastructure for mitigation purposes, at least to protect their interests. We're not saying they're going to go all the way for a Green New Deal, but they're applying pressure. And the fact that Jerome Powell, Jay Powell, the head of the Federal Reserve Bank, came out about 2 months ago for the first time and made an official statement about climate change and that we need to do something about it. And then 2 weeks later came out and announced that the Fed, for the first time, is going to join a global network of central banks and financial regulators and insurance regulators, who mostly in Europe. It's called NGFS, which is the Network for Greening the Financial Services or something like that. Which means they're now getting the pressure from Wall Street. I mean, it should be the other way around. We should be, having government officials apply the pressure on Wall Street to do the right thing. This time, it's the opposite. It's the financial industry that is telling governments, we need to do something about this because the risk is on our books. And the global estimate for what we call the carbon bubble, which is going to be the biggest financial market collapse when all of those stranded assets collapse in value. The conservative estimate, we're talking about $20 to $30 trillion, possibly more. And all of those financial assets happen to be mostly in the global north, in Wall Street and London and Tokyo and so on. So those institutions are already panicking about the impact of climate change. So you may have noticed, if you followed, and I'm sure you did, you followed the Biden campaign, how they started Green New Deal and all of that. And then by the time he got the nomination, it appeared like all of a sudden the Sunrise Movement is having a voice. All of a sudden the Bernie, views on climate change are becoming more and more prominent. I guarantee you it wasn't Bernie or Sunrise. I mean, I love both of them, and I think they helped quite a bit. But I think it was the Wall Street guys, because what did Biden say over and over and over again? My climate policy was reviewed by Wall Street bankers and Wall Street economists, and they said it's going to. He kept citing them. He didn't cite Sunrise or Bernie because they are the ones who are applying the pressure. So what do they want? They just want an infrastructure to build resilience to protect their interests. They don't want the whole Green New Deal thing, which brings you the full package. So we have to dissect all of these things that are about to happen. Yes, by all means, we need a big infrastructure program for Florida and for the rest of the country, and we're all pushing for it. I'm part of a network of organizations here in Appalachia called Reimagining Appalachia in Ohio, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Kentucky. And we have a Green New Deal-ish blueprint for broadband infrastructure, for green jobs, for manufacturing, for reviving the CCC from the 1930s, for conservation and regenerative agriculture and so on. And you can think of it as a pilot Green New Deal for the region that should be scaled to the rest of the country. So we have a limited window of opportunity in the next few months to really apply pressure and do this big push. Because so far, and I insist on saying so far, not yet, right? So far, the Biden administration, and he made it very clear the last few days that he's not going to be concerned about the deficit. You know why? Because his economists and economic advisors have been telling him we shouldn't be concerned about the deficit. There's an emergency on climate, on infrastructure, and all of these things. And their justification, and this is the part that I have a problem with, their justification is not what we talked about in the MMT and all of that. Their justification is interest rates are really low now. So if we don't take advantage and borrow and spend right now, it's going to be too expensive in the future and we're not going to afford it, right? So those same economists, at some point when they see the deficit and the national debt number rise in the next year or two with the big infrastructure spending, they're going to start panicking. They're going to think inflation is right around the corner. We're going to go bankrupt. Wall Street is going to, panic. And then they're going to apply pressure on Biden to say, now we need to worry about the deficit. By the way, it's the same more or less economic team from the Obama administration.
Yeah,
We've heard this story before. Economic relief after 2008. By the time you get to 2012, that's it. Now we have to worry about the deficit. And guess who's going to join them in this chorus? It's going to be the Republicans. We're going to say, oh my God, the deficit, we're going bankrupt, our children, our future generations, and we're turning into a Venezuela. And of course, they're going to cave in and say, the campaign in 2022, I hope not, it's going to be all about the deficit. So we need to, apply pressure on all fronts. One is make sure we get the infrastructure, the climate spending, and all of the economic relief we need immediately. Number two, we have to anticipate and fight back against the deficit phobia, against this obsession with the risk of inflation and all of that from a conservative perspective. If anything, MMT economists are obsessed with inflation because that's the true constraint. Right. And somehow the mainstream economists and establishment politicians, they think of inflation as this unknown beast. And they've acknowledged, even the Fed acknowledge that they have no reliable theory of inflation. In other words, plain English translation, we have no idea what causes inflation.
Right.
Yet somehow they know that a Green New Deal and climate infrastructure will probably be too much and will cause inflation. We need to call their bluff, and we need to educate and empower and mobilize people to push back against this. Even if we're successful with Biden in convincing him that these are all important priorities. Remember what FDR said in the 30s is, I'm with you, I agree with you, you've convinced me, now make me do it. Right, make me do it, which means this is a democratic process issue, yes. Mobilizing the masses, not just angry pitchforks,
right?
What I call well-informed pitchforks who know what the real constraints are and who can push back against the power of Wall Street and the pharmaceuticals and so on. So this is really the challenge for us. It's not going to be, where do we find the money? It's about finding the votes in Congress and applying pressure with every single elected official that, your seat is on the table. If you're not going to support the people, a government of the people, by the people, for the people, you're next to be primaried. You're next to be out, no matter which political affiliation you have, because our lives are on the line.
Fadhel, you bring up a great point, and we'll have a couple of rapid fire questions to wrap up. But the last thing I did want to ask, obviously, you met Jen and myself in DC just over a year ago. We're very fortunate now to have both Cori Bush and Jamal Bowman in the halls of Congress, and Lord knows, brand new Congress will probably be able to bring on maybe 3 or 4 people next round.
Nina Turner soon.
Well, knocking on wood 1,000 times over. Yeah, she's as good as it gets. Great podcast. If you guys haven't seen it,
check it out. We talked to her last week.
May the 4th.
Yes, and may the 4th be with her. That's for sure. Can you talk about? We do have a question from a gentleman. Flying jellyfish.
Flying jellyfish is a very good supporter.
And what is your thoughts on the Raise the Wage Act?
By all means, yes. I've been talking about raising the wage.
There you go.
No, there's more detail to it, obviously, than just yes. So this is long overdue. The minimum wage is. I encourage everybody to just Google living wage calculator from the MIT living wage calculator, and look up county by county across the country. What they do is they tell you what the living wage is compared to the poverty wage, based on the poverty line, compared to the actual minimum wage. And then they lay out the cost of living in your own county to figure out the gap. And to this day, I haven't found a single county, and I searched a lot, where the minimum wage is actually a living wage. So this is long overdue. And I'll add just one quick metaphor to help us all collectively mobilize around this issue, because the corporations are going to push back and say, well, we can't afford it. It's going to break our business model. Well, remember during slavery how slave owners said we can't afford it. This is going to break our businesses. Right. We're going to go bankrupt. What did society tell them? Well, it's too bad. If you can't afford it, you should be out of business, and somebody else will take your spot and will make it work, because we just, as a society, can't allow that to happen. We need to do that again today and say, if you're not paying a living wage, if you can't compete, well, it's too bad. You need to be out of business. Now, I have to nuance this by saying small businesses are constrained. They're not the same as the Amazons and the Walmarts. So how do we support small businesses? Universal health care will reduce their cost. FICA taxes that they have to pay as employers and employees, that will be a boost. So lowering the unnecessary burden on small businesses, but keeping the taxes on corporations and so on. This way we produce a more equitable effect, so that everybody can actually afford to pay a living wage, no matter what size company you are.
I've always thought that. And I do feel for small business owners. I do. Like, you've got people that have maybe only a handful of employees, and the idea of they really can't see around that. And I feel for them, but then I also feel like if you can't pay employees a living wage, then you're having a failed business. That's by definition not a successful business. So I just think we've allowed that to go on, where people somehow think that constitutes okay. And if we had never allowed that, we wouldn't even have that thought now.
Right. And part of it is federal policy. It's the burden that we shift on small businesses, and we let the big corporations get away with paying no taxes and taking advantage of all the free infrastructure we provide for them and so on.
Yeah.
I do think we're in a completely different position now than we were 12 years ago. When Obama took office, I think the impact of Bernie's 2 runs, especially his first run, to change the narrative in this idea of how do you pay for it, this is impossible, etc., where you really have a sizable portion of the population now that is saying, no, we can pay for it, and we're not taking no for an answer anymore. Exactly. Are there people on the Hill as of today that are receptive to modern monetary theory? One of the people that I would think would be very receptive to this would be Ro Khanna, but I'm sure that there are probably others that perhaps you have been in communication with that have at least voiced interest, because as I read in Kelton's book, there are a lot of people on the Hill that are aware of this.
Yeah.
But as we know, the overwhelming majority of people who currently serve in the United States Congress, whether in the House or the Senate, they are corporate captured by corporate special interests. Obviously, our congressional representative, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, would be a great example of that.
Yep.
Are there people that currently are not corporate captured that are open to MMT, as far as what you've been able to come across to this point?
So it's a difficult question to answer completely openly, because some people are open about it. Ro Khanna, talks about it. AOC talks about it. Cori Bush, Jamal Bowman, and so on, and many other progressives are working with some of my colleagues and drafting bills and so on. So those are known, the squad and the progressives. The people in the middle, I'm not talking about the Nancy Pelosi's and the corporate power.
No.
The Congress people in the middle, the people that most people don't know, right?
Right.
They kind of follow
Yes.
in the middle. Those are really interesting because they're very curious. Many of them are honestly trying to serve their people, but they live within the constrained power structure of the DNC, of the corporate oligarchy, and so on. So they're curious behind closed doors. You spend an hour with them on the phone or on a call or in person. They get it at the end of the day. But then the question becomes, do we have enough leverage? In other words, do we have enough people in the mainstream media to support this? Do we have enough of my constituents who actually understand this if I say it in a soundbite? Because we live in a world of a soundbite, right? Well, we had almost like an hour conversation now to begin kind of to scratch the surface. But if you're a candidate and all you have is a little postcard to put a message on it, you can't really deliver this easily. So they're really interested in kind of waiting for the movement to grow so that the constituents are aware of it, so that there's more candidates who speak about it publicly, more people in the media who push back against the deficit myth narrative. And then they say, if we have all that critical mass, then by all means, I'm open for it and I'm all for it. And my joke is usually,
everyone waits for it to be safe.
Yeah,
everyone.
So my joke is, if we have that critical mass, we'll vote you out of office and we have somebody like Jen do the job. Right?
Well, I mean, I find a lot of people wait for it to be safe. They wait for, we have the same thing as candidates getting people to endorse and support. There's people that would love to, but they're scared to, and they need to make sure that it's okay with the powers that be. And really what it comes down to is that people are inherently cowards. I'm sorry, but they don't want to put themselves out.
And you know why it's changing? Especially this last election cycle with so many brand new Congress candidates and progressive candidates. We counted close to 200 candidates across the country who were running on a bold progressive agenda with MMT-informed answers to the question of how do you pay for it. And not all of them obviously won, but guess what? All of them knocked on hundreds of thousands and millions of doors across the country. They pushed back against the incumbents. They forced the incumbents to shift their narrative about the deficit, about how do we pay for it, on climate change, on minimum wage, on social justice. So that grassroots work is alive and well. And partly it's thanks to Bernie, obviously, for bringing this, for inspiring all of these candidates and this movement. But none of that infrastructure is disappearing simply because Bernie is no longer running. That infrastructure is there. Some of it is jumpstarting right now as we speak for the new election cycle. And sooner or later, we're going to have more AOCs and more Cori Bushes and more Jamal Bowmans. And those congressmen and women in the middle who are okay with MMT behind closed doors and are hesitant, they're waiting for the critical mass to happen. And they're going to jump, on the MMT bandwagon because they know that's the way forward.
And I honestly think that the biggest difference now is the fact that there are people who are really starting to grasp the concept of we really have to elect our representatives that are not attached to corporate special interest money.
Right.
That's really it. That is when I hear people say, oh, I'm progressive, I'm conservative, I'm liberal. No, you're either corporate or non-corporate. That's where it begins. That's where it ends. Because overwhelmingly people agree on the major policy issues. It's the wedge issues that are what divides people. And if you look at the majority of Democrat and Republican websites over the past, we'll say 30 years, you will see that they always lead with a wedge issue, whether it is
Right.
abortion, whether it is gun rights, whatever it is. It's to show the rabid base of people that,
Mhm.
hey, I'm with you. And those guys over there, they're the bad guys. That's the type of politics that's got to die in this country. And I think a lot of people are starting to recognize that. We're not going to agree with everybody's methodology in terms of how we're going to get there. But I do think this unifying issue of the economy and how it will work for everybody, whether it is through MMT, whether it is through UBI, whether it's through a combination of both, and then other things spliced in between. I do think this is a healthy conversation that needs to be had more often. I hate to ask, but I'm willing to bet that of the congressional members that you have spoken to, you probably haven't gotten a single one from the state of Florida who agrees with this. Tell me I'm wrong. I would love to be wrong, but I don't think I am. Tell me there's one.
Do you
person
have
in
a
Florida.
Floridian?
I'm sorry?
Do you have a Floridian on
Tell
your
me you
list?
got at least one. Tell me there's
No,
one Floridian.
not me personally.
There is not one Floridian, ladies and gentlemen. Why must we always be the butt end of every joke?
Florida.
Florida, yeah, really. And of course, is it? And we'll conclude with this, Fadhel. When you saw the again, there were a lot of people who were in DC, so there is not this misnomer about how many people were actually there for this Trump rally, whatever you want to call it. But the people who went in there, and the guy who ended up taking Pelosi's lectern and smiling at the camera, I'm like, you just had to know that guy was from
He was
Florida.
from Florida.
You just had to know. It's like
I didn't know that.
Yes,
yeah, of
the
course.
guy with the lectern smiling. Yeah, he's from Florida.
I'm like, yeah, we really do earn our reputation. But I got to tell you, and let's conclude with this. I really think a state, even a state like Ohio is very interesting because I think it is a perfect representation of the whole country in many respects.
I hope not. We have Jim Jordan.
No, you do have Jim Jordan, but thankfully he's only in Congress. He's not a senator. That could obviously, God forbid, ever change.
We have our own problems. I can't be worrying about Ohio. I'm sorry. I can't.
But I really do think, and let's leave with this, Fadhel. I really do think Florida could be ground zero in many ways for economic populism in the country. This is a state that is driven predominantly by the service industry and tourism. We do not have a state that is advocates for workers. We're a right to work state, so that obviously makes it as bad as it gets. And there's been Republican domination in the state for over 20 years. And as we have seen, there is a yearning for some type of a change. That's why Andrew Gillum got very close to the governor's mansion not too long ago. And I do believe there could potentially be a very dynamic progressive candidate in a lady by the name of Anna Eskamani, who may end up running for governor, to challenge an austerity to the hilt type of person in Ron DeSantis, aside from the fact that he's a total jerk. I do think that this is a state that could really thrive on pushing the modern monetary theory message.
My God, we need infrastructure so badly.
We really do. So as we go forward, I hope we can continue this conversation. Obviously, we're definitely going to have Steve Grumbine come on the show. We'd love to have Stephanie Kelton come on as well. I think we should try to do some type of a panel at some point.
Sure.
But if there's any final thoughts that you want to leave us with, and to the audience, by all means, but this has been extremely informative. And like I said, for people who need to understand economics in a way that makes sense to Main Street and not Wall Street, this is the type of economic theory that really needs to be front and center for as many people as possible.
Absolutely. And I want to thank you for doing this podcast and YouTube channel, and for running and for keeping the conversation going, because we're not going to go anywhere if we, lay down and wait for the dominant narrative to take over again and convince everybody that there's nothing we can do, right? It's too late. So we need to organize, we need to educate, mobilize, and empower people with information and with democratic political capital, which is, voting with our feet, voting with our voices, and not voting once every 2 years and once every 4 years and calling it a democracy. This is sustained, applied pressure on the establishment, on candidates and representatives to make sure that we dominate the narrative and we get a government of the people, by the people, for the people. So I would invite everybody to engage with the MMT community on social media or whatever you can. Stephanie Kelton is very accessible on social media. By all means, read her book. It's very accessible. Call their bluff. Call your congressmen, your senators, call their bluff when they say we don't have the money. Call their bluff when they say inflation. Call their bluff when they say we're bankrupt. And do your detective work. Do your homework. Identify who's actually behind the scenes. Because when it comes to all of these policies, they're actually extremely popular. It's not just the progressives. Something like Medicare for all. Yes. The only people who oppose it are mostly elected officials in DC. They're lobbyists, the media companies that spin their stories, and the super PACs that bankroll their agenda. That's it. The rest of us are on the same page, Republicans, Democrats, Independents. So call their bluff and identify who's behind the scenes, who's driving the narrative. And once we expose them, and once people recognize that this is not a true democracy when a super PAC is really deciding public policy for the rest of us and putting our lives on the line. That's how we mobilize. That's how we organize. That's how we inform people. And once we do that, and they know it, they know that our movement is extremely dangerous for their interest. As a matter of fact, they said MMT is dangerous for the country. There's a Senate resolution, I don't know if you've seen it, to condemn MMT as dangerous for the country.
Oh my God.
Right? That's the type of thing that Senator Inhofe would probably put forward, or Senator Cotton. It's got to be like one of those two.
Oh my God.
I don't remember. It was sponsored by 5 Republican senators. I can't remember who they are.
Oh, I'm willing to bet my bottom dollar one of those two is on that.
It's very possible.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Fadhel, it's been a pleasure, and we will definitely, like I said, reconvene at a later date, and it's been extremely informative, and we thank you again for your time.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
So this has been
great.
Exceptionally informative.
Before I forget my thought, and that happens to me, like it could just be a minute and it's gone. But like,
let me talk about something real quick.
Don't do that. Look, I'm already going to lose it. So we were talking about the cost of things and how things, and I've been saying this for a really long time, that when you're talking about infrastructure, education, and healthcare, those are not costs. They're investments. Right. And what's so interesting to me is that the only actual thing that we really spend money on that's a cost is war, because that's something that we don't get back. Like, that's not an investment in anything. It's technically, yes, I see that you could say, well, yes, then we can have them pay us to rebuild them after we've bombed them. But it really isn't. It's not an investment in us, in our people, in our country. It's just not. It's a complete waste. So,
well, a guest that we're looking to have on very soon, Tom Hartman, he's somebody who has said repeatedly, he's actually the person I picked up this statistic from a number of years back. For every dollar we invest in education, $7 goes back into the economy. So that's that's the word that doesn't get used enough. Instead of saying spending, it's investing.
Yeah, that's what I say. It's an investment. And wait. Also, this is completely non sequitur, but did you see the Bo
yes,
watching?
Of course I did.
I don't know if he's still watching.
So it just goes to show you.
Oh my God, I held that in for so long. I got to tell you, like, as soon as that came up, I was like, I don't know if everybody realizes that, but Bo, Fifth Column, is watching my podcast, and I was like, I wanted to but I couldn't say anything. And then you put that up on this screen, and I was like,
Jen's closest comrade. I shouldn't even say the word comrade.
No,
but her closest ally in the state of Florida in independent media without question, is one of the biggest YouTube personalities and shows, Bo, the Fifth Column.
Yeah, so if people don't watch Bo, you should, because he's awesome.
So here's a guy that gets a few 100,000 views on an average video, and he's dropping in on our stream to let us know that, hey, I want to let you know I'm watching.
I know. Well, I like that, but also it really does go to show you something, because the people here we're talking about, how come you're not having all these views and all these people are over on Tim Pool? And it really goes to show you that certain people recognize when you're having quality discourse and information. And Bo is someone who is extremely bright and is always curious. And so any opportunity for him to learn something or see something, that would be. He's not somebody that wants to watch people just argue amongst themselves.
No, and again, that's the whole thing about the whole bridging of the divide.
Yeah,
because we're from one completely different part of the state, whereas Bo is from Matt Gates's country.
Oh my God,
that's where he is.
Bo lives up in
Floribama.
BFE, Floribama.
Yeah,
but anyway, so that was very exciting for me that he was watching.
So for those that are watching, yes, 1,000%, recommend Stephanie Kelton's book, The Deficit Myth. I'm going to get this lady here to read it.
It's not that I don't want to read it. It's this. It's that, and I really say this with all the love in my heart. I don't think that I'm that interested enough in that detail, knowing, understanding that theory. I feel like I don't
That's
need
my
to.
job.
Well, it's not mine, and I feel like people like me rely on people like Fadhel to have that information. We don't all need to be MMT experts by any means. And I have a very big stack of books that I'm trying to get through right now. I'm reading a book called Medical Apartheid, which has to do with,
that's important.
It is. And I highly recommend that. I'm in the middle of it. I don't anticipate it that it won't still be good as I get to the end of it, but
Sure.
Medical Apartheid by Harriet Washington. And it's about the history of healthcare in the Black community. And it is not the same as our white history of healthcare. It isn't. It's completely different. So this, and it shines a light on one of the issues in the Black community regarding healthcare today, and their basically hesitation of trusting healthcare. And after reading this book, now I'm starting to understand why. But we did skip something very important, which is our bootlicker this week. So we want to do that.
We'd be bereft if we were not talking about the fact that, look, Trump is going to skate. Everyone knows he's going to skate.
Are you going into bootlicker?
He's way too
All right,
popular.
I'm doing the graphic. I'm excited.
However, I do think that there are certain members of the United States Congress who think that they can hide behind the scenes and get away with what they're going to get away with. Those are the people that need to be removed from office. And you have
this fine
already
specimen.
Some very interesting information about Lauren Boebert, who apparently was at least one of the members of the GOP Congress that was giving walkthroughs.
Gates was one of them too. Matt Gaetz was on that list. Yes, there was a group of GOP Congress people that were giving basically walkthroughs the day before the insurrection event and showing people in theory. Now, again, could there have also just been tours coincidentally because people came to Washington, D.C. for this?
Sure,
and I'm sure people were doing
something that they should not have been doing.
Well, right. But the fact that there were these tours and they were almost like reconnaissance missions is what it's looking like. And I am not going to start spewing whatever nonsense that is. But what I do know is that this sort of like Sarah Palin light situation is not serving us well. We don't need people like this. We just don't. This is not helping. It's just not helping. Who does she represent?
She's Colorado's third.
Oh, I'm so sorry to my Colorado friends which area of Colorado? Does anybody know?
I think
I could venture to say it's not my peeps in Boulder.
It's definitely not Boulder or Denver. I can tell you that.
I was going to say it is not my peeps.
No, I mean, well, yeah, she's
okay.
Yeah.
She very well. I'm just going with the physicality and the gun toting and the shooting moose from my backyard.
This whole idea that they're acting like oppressed people because they think that you're going to take their guns away. It's like, no.
And here, I am not against guns. I'm not against guns. I have no problem with guns. I mean, I don't want a gun. I've never felt the need to. Personally don't feel the need to have one.
But there's a big difference between being pro Second Amendment and pro NRA. There is a huge difference between the two things.
But see, people like this, though, to me, people like this, what's her name? Lauren Boebert. That's sort of grandstanding and using the Second Amendment to sort of just make a name for yourself. Like, I don't understand the point of this. Now, the idea that they want to carry into Congress, I actually don't have a problem with that. I really don't have a problem like that. These people are the people that are making the rules that allow us to be able to carry. These are the people that essentially are the rules are trickling down, that whereas in our state, we want our teachers to be able to carry. So you know what? If these Congress people don't feel safe with guns in their chamber, then they should try to imagine how our kids feel in their schools. But, so these are grown people. These are grown people. If they want to choose to bring guns to work and they want to live in that kind of environment, that's between them and them. I actually don't care about that. And if shit goes down and gunfire starts flying all over the place, may the best man win up there, to tell you the truth. Maybe it'll be her. Maybe it'll be Lauren Boebert. Maybe she'll be like the designated survivor. Who knows?
I disagree. And this is an issue where, you're basically daring people to it's almost like a person who's got a bottle of gasoline and they don't know what they're going to do with it, and then somebody's egging them on to try to hand them
You
a
know what, though?
match.
And I would maybe feel for any of those people, but let's pull aside the amount of those people that take corporate dollars. Every single person in that Congress that takes corporate dollars, as far as I'm concerned, I have no problem with them feeling scared that people are carrying guns in their chamber. If you're taking corporate money, you are part of the system that allows the NRA to purchase other members of our Congress. And if you're doing that, you're perpetuating that system that allows corporate interests to control us. You should be scared. I'm scared all the time. I honestly, it's like anything that is a risk for us just living on the streets. Yes, it should be a risk for them too. If they don't like feeling unsafe, then they should imagine how we feel. I have no problem with that. If that you want to die on your Second Amendment hill, die on it in your chamber. I honestly have no problem with it.
Leroy, the reason why I think people see Trump in the light that they see him in, especially down here, is because when you get so desperate and you think no one's listening to you and he can put on a show.
Well, that's
because
it.
Trump is really good.
He's a salesman.
Really, really incredible.
He's a snake oil
He put
salesman,
on a
and
really
he's
great show.
all he
Tremendous
can do is
show.
that. That's all he can do.
I can convince people that I'm the greatest person in the history of the
Well, it
American
hasn't
human
worked on
race.
a lot
No,
of
it's
people.
totally worked. And believe me, they stole that election.
I don't know that I
They
want to do
totally,
this anymore.
they
with
totally
the Trump
stole that
losing it.
election. I'm totally the president still, and I'm going to remain the president. They're never going to put.
See, I
Biden
think that
in.
now after
Never gonna
last week,
happen.
that it's not even the impersonations are kind of going to be lost. Like it's not even funny anymore.
Who wants me to stop being Donald Trump?
I do.
I
No,
know.
please.
No, I totally can't stop.
You have to stop.
There is no way that I'm going to stop being the president of the United States. This is exactly what people want to see. It's what they want to hear, and they really, really enjoy it. And I am totally better than that total non-president.
I'm covering your face with the Buddha.
That total non-president and Joe Biden. He's totally lost his mind. He really thinks he won the election. He totally
Oh my
can't
God,
count
people,
votes.
save
really,
me.
Really crazy.
Save
But
me.
the truth is,
you're right. His
no.
Bernie is better. I agree. His Bernie is better. Thank you. Look, please stop. That's what I think. Thank you, Leroy. I agree. And when Trump leaves, maybe that's the end of that. The only problem with the Bernie is the teeth. All right. The teeth really bother me. Well, the teeth and the googly eyes. This mask makes Bernie. Wait, first of all, his head looks totally caved in on this side. There.
Jen, I just want you to know you really did a phenomenal job tonight. I think that guy Fadhel really knows what he's talking about because MMT is a very important theory. I believe in a federal jobs guarantee, and I believe we all have to have not only good paying jobs, but also universal health care.
I agree.
And as the new chair of the Senate Budget Committee, did you hear about that?
I did. I
It was
heard
really
all about
important.
that.
Listen, my good friend Joe Biden, he listened to me and he gave me a very important position. I am going to make sure that the American people get exactly what they need. Rest assured, Joe Biden will be our next president, and he will be sworn in just 5 days. And when he is president, I will be the most important person in the United States Senate. And we are going to get people their $2,000 checks, and I'm going to push for a reconciliation clause so we can get everybody emergency universal health care.
Excellent.
Keep pushing.
Thank you, Senator Sanders. Thank you for that. There you go. All right. And we'll take that down because I know you were referring to the Trump, and I think I'm kind of over the Trump thing. I really do. Like, I think it needs to, I think it's sort of like one of those fads that needs to go away now.
oh, come on, man.
All right.
You
So
don't really want me to start practicing my Biden, do you?
no, I don't.
really
Yeah,
sucks.
I saw that too. So Biden's calling for the $1,400 checks
Well,
now.
Bernie did a step further and said, no, we need 2,000.
Well, I was waiting for them to do that justification. Like, well, we already gave you 600. So now here's the 14. And so really we are giving you 2 over the course of a year and a half. So be happy with that.
Imagine thinking we
And
had
then-
life in a world for so long where, well, we always had to listen to Reaganomics and convince
Oh,
people
he's
that you
crazy.
were so not worth anything. Government, hi, I am from the government and I am here to help. Remember that line? I mean,
Oh,
Ronald Reagan,
God.
the Reagan era has got to die, just like Clinton era has got to
It's just
die.
got to go. It's
It
just
is.
got to go.
It's a new era now. And that's what I hope a lot of people understand is that we really are evolving into this new era that
Oh,
I
let
just
me
think-
tell you about the Buddha. Oh, wasn't making any sort of religious statement, guys, whatsoever. I see you're just mentioning the Buddha. It's literally the little Buddha that comes with True Religion clothes. And it's really cute. So I just sort of kept it sitting on my desk. It's not any sort of, it's not, I like to sort of, it's like more of a fidget thing than anything. But yeah, it is a Buddha.
Scott, I don't care what Biden promised. The reality is, with all due respect, he can't remember what he said 5 minutes ago, and he'll just say, "Oh, come on, man! I never said that. I totally didn't say that." Bernie, did you hear me say that? Joe, yes, I did hear you say that, and you are going to give people the $2,000 checks. Can you believe that he's actually going to try to make it $1,400? He's like, oh, well, the 600 is not enough, so we'll make up the difference. It's like, God damn, they're going to really try to negotiate off $600.
Yeah, Leroy. Ron Reagan Jr. has always been a lefty. He's always been a little bit on the progressive-y side of things, especially considering his lineage.
Yes, and Ricardo was right. Trump is not going anywhere. He is going to be around. He's going to have a TV network, and God knows what else he's going to be up to. They did a poll today. Trump already at this moment has 40% of the vote for from the GOP if he were to run for president again right now. It's, again,
I don't understand that.
I just think people are sick and tired of politics as usual.
I am, but the GOP even has other slimy options to choose from. Why just Trump? I mean, they've got some other
I just think they dig Trump's shtick. I think that's all it is. Trump is entertaining.
Well,
at least you've
it's
got
gotten
that.
old to me.
I'm
over it.
And I think Mario, who's been on the thread for the first time, Mario Peraza right there. The truth is, one of the reasons why, Tim Pool's show, for example, and we will always be grateful for Tim because he brought Jen on and exposed her to a huge audience.
I think I was called Karen how many times? Like 1,000 times. I have like 1,000 Karens.
When 50,000 people are watching.
I got like a lot. I was Karen.
If 1,000 people call you Karen, that's not a bad ratio. That's 5%.
I don't mind that. I don't.
So you can live with that.
Call me Karen.
You can live with that. Actually, wait, I can't.
Back to the Tim Pool thing. But the Tim Pool, you know what though? People like to watch arguing, fighting, and they like to feel like they're on a team. And the kinds of shows that sort of perpetuate anger towards the other side, fighting among, like, those shows do well because people really like to have a team. And I don't present a team because I'm not on a team. I'm on, team getting people what they need. So that's part of it. But there is a place for that. And I have, I like Tim Pool. He was very nice. He was very hospitable. I don't agree with him on some policies. I agree with him on other policies. Some of his viewers are just regular people. Some of them are wackadoos. But I think that's just the nature of everything.
The GOP has been hanging on by a thread for a very long time. Reagan was an exceptionally popular president.
But yet they run every state.
Well, that's true. You see, the difference is that the GOP makes it a point to always make sure that they know who is running for dog catcher, much less who's running for senator or president. They make a point to be involved in all elections. Democrats don't care about that stuff because, unfortunately, the Democratic Party is consumed predominantly, as of today, by suburbanite, gated community liberals. That's a problem.
It's an elitism issue. It's an elitism
problem. Which basically
problem.
means that they're only interested when it's time to vote. Yeah. To actually go out and knock on doors, phone bank, do community service, things of that nature that really matter and build community camaraderie. They don't give a damn about shit like that.
No, they're very comfortable because it doesn't. They're comfortable.
The most effective progressives, as we're seeing today, are actually in big cities. It's part of the reason why there is somewhat of a progressive movement down here in cities like Orlando, Tampa, and yes, even to an extent,
right? No,
Miami.
you see it in New York. You see it in New York. Okay, you got Corey in St. Louis.
You see it in Los Angeles. You see, it's Corey in St. Louis. They exist, but they don't exist where they really need to exist. They really need to exist in the South, in the heartland, in the Great Plains.
Well, we're trying to do that.
We're trying to build that.
I'd like to consider us sort of like the little progressive hub in South Florida for progressive information. Like we need to even get away from using the term progressive because I think that's being co-opted.
No, I think that we are the part. We have to become the labor.
Yeah,
movement.
We're the labor people.
You cannot co-opt the term labor. You can't, because that is really the difference between where management and labor, where the rubber meets the road. You have corporate versus non-corporate. Perfect example, as we discussed down here. Debbie Wasserman Schultz has maintained her power for a very long time because she has certain proxies in place that make sure that she is not challenged to the extent that she needs to be, particularly in the labor movement. The person who is ahead of the labor movement in South Florida is a man by the name of Dan Reynolds, who runs the Florida AFL-CIO.
We're going to keep saying this till everybody knows who this man is.
Broward
Dan
County
Reynolds.
AFL-CIO. Here is a person who needs to be challenged and unfortunately has been protecting Debbie for 25 years.
So
Now,
anybody
until
who
that
knows people
changes,
in South Florida, in unions, this is the kind of stuff that we're dealing with down here, is impeding progress or people like that.
yes, 1,000%. And there are others. I may be getting involved with the Democratic Progressive Caucus of Florida in Broward County. So
You could be looking at our next head of the Broward County Democratic Progressive Caucus. Look, she's so proud of you.
Mm.
She's so proud
I
of
love you too, you little munchkin. So we do have to get rolling because it's almost 10 o'clock and Jen's husband, Jason's birthday
It
is
is.
today.
It is my husband's birthday. It's not a big birthday. It's his 51st. I feel like, that's kind of anticlimactic. Yeah, that was Lulu. So who found me? Kenneth. Right. So you see, you found us on Tim Pool. So this is somebody who came on here from Tim Pool. And that was exactly the point of why I went on Tim Pool. Because I, unlike a lot of people on the left, do not feel the need to yell into an echo chamber. I would much rather reach out to people and find allies where we don't know that they already exist. That's how we already know who's on our team. We need to find people that are not on our team to come over and work with us on the issues.
Exactly, because when it comes to the issue of labor, that crosses over. That is a working class issue. That is a significant portion of Trump's base, whether anybody wants to talk about it or not. But it's true. And that is what is going to ultimately change. Going to see a very interesting fight here in the state of Florida coming up with somebody like, Marco Rubio. And, this is, again, times are changing, as they say. We're living in a very unique time. Never doubt that we can actually make the change that is necessary. But we are going to be back
next week
on Monday. We have something
on Monday.
Yeah, we've got 2 shows a week now. So
okay,
Monday night,
I guess we're doing 2 shows
and
a week.
Thursday night.
Okay, so what was something that was here that I want? Oh, Leroy, it's your wife's 50th. Yeah, don't mess that up, dude. Don't mess that up. A lot of girls care about that stuff. Personally, I don't. Actually, speaking of 50th, though, mine is coming up. My 50th birthday is coming up in May, and there will inevitably be a big fundraiser attached to it. I did a huge Habitat Humanity build for my 40th. I raised $2,800. And
let's make it even bigger.
Yeah, we're gonna make it bigger. But not only that, but I had a whole crew from, instead of having a birthday party, we all met and did a build on my birthday in Oakland Park in Broward. So I'm gonna come up with something equally as fun, most likely involving my community garden project.
Are we going to the community garden tomorrow?
I'm gonna be at the garden tomorrow morning.
Okay.
I don't know exactly what else will be going on at the garden. I can't say just yet. We're still waiting for the big mulch machine to come through. But yeah, guys,
we've got avocados and bananas.
We do.
We've got a lot of good stuff.
We do. The community garden is going to be amazing. So anyway, guys, check us out. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe on YouTube. If you're not watching it on YouTube, please subscribe on YouTube. Check us out. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram, or Twitter and Instagram, rather, at JenFL23.
Make sure you subscribe. You totally got to subscribe to the channel. Make sure that you hit the like button, comment, and share. And listen, we totally got to get the watch hours up. Oh, yeah. Nina Turner. I actually like that Nina Turner. She was a great singer. She was really tremendous. She sang What's Love Got to Do With It? And believe me, there's nothing to do with it. Love is totally overrated. I'm on my 4th wife. I'll be on my 5th pretty soon. Sorry, Melania, you ran out of time.
All right. I can't. I'm giving him the hook.
No,
all right, guys.
totally
I have to go. I need to go eat. I need to have, and I didn't even get him dinner for his birthday. I said, order what you want. I bought a cake, though. There's a cake sitting there. So I'm going to go have cake for my birthday.
Leroy, we know
it's
Trump
his
sucks,
birthday,
but it's all in good fun.
Yeah.
So
all right,
with
guys.
That said,
he's got to copy me. You're going to copy me. Go ahead. Peace out. Go ahead. Copy me. You know.
Bye, guys. We'll see you again real soon.
Bye, all.